at shik auto shidene she nanisht ejitrachi inishli Lyla June dashijine. Greetings, my kin and my people. My name is Lyla June, and I come from the Dene Nation of the Nanisht Ejitrachitni clan. We are indigenous to what is now called New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah in United States, or as we prefer to call it, Turtle Island. And I'm just so grateful to be here with all of you and grateful to share space with you in prayer for the healing of our Mother Earth and of our communities. So some people ask, how does my spirituality and my moral philosophy inform my work? Well, for Dene people, our prayer is everything. We don't really have a separation between our prayer and our normal life. So when the anthropologists first came to our communities, they thought we didn't have a religion. But the truth is, our ceremony just never stopped. Our traditional home, the Hogan, is actually our dwelling place, our school, and our prayer place. So where you learn, live, and pray is all wrapped up into one. There was no separation of school, now I'm in school, now I'm out of school. Like every moment was learning and every moment was prayer. Every breath was prayer. And so I think that's how it informs my work, is that my work is, ideally, if I do it right, it is a prayer each and every moment. And so our moral philosophy as Dene people, and not just Dene people, but people around the world, is that we're here to be kind, we're here to be humble, we are here to be generous, and we are here to be brave, and to have an allegiance to truth and faith and love. And so that has become kind of abnormal in today's world. Like if I were to go around saying those things, people would think I was like a preacher, or I was, too good or whatever. But in our old societies, it really was quite normal to have that kinship with each other and with all things. And so I think that's how I try to operate. Like, for instance, in our womanhood ceremonies, you make a really big corn cake. And they say that the bigger the cake is, the more generous this woman will be. And she grinds corn for 4 days, and then she makes the cake, and then she gives it all away. And she doesn't have a single bite. And so generosity is actually instilled in us very young. And same with the manhood ceremonies. It's about showing them that to be a man is to be generous, is to be kind, is to be supportive of your people. So I would say that is heard around the world, because love is going to be the answer no matter where you are. But I would say that's how my philosophy and spirituality inform my everyday work. Some of the most cutting edge ideas and practices as it relates to climate change today and addressing the climate crisis, to me, is about Indigenous wisdom. And I think that Native people have been portrayed for hundreds of years as savages, as primitive, as unintelligent. But the truth is, our societies were incredibly sophisticated and complex, and really advanced in terms of their food sciences, their astronomy, their organizational structures and governance, their understanding of genetics, their understanding of linguistics, and their understanding of spirituality. And so people still to this day buy into those stereotypes, and even we as Native people sometimes internalize those lies about who we are. But to me, I think, especially doing my PhD research, reading up and seeing how so many nations across the continent, both in yesteryear and still today, had incredibly and beautiful and complex food systems. My PhD work is in Indigenous food systems. And so I think our food systems are just one iteration of how Indigenous peoples are cutting edge in terms of the climate crisis. And this is why. People in Kentucky, the ancestors were the Shawnee. we have fossilized pollen evidence that shows that they maintained and stewarded and managed a acorn, black walnut, hickory nut, chestnut, sumpweed, goosefoot, all these different edible plant species, an entire forest for 3,000 years. The pollen is present and persistent, and also persistent there is fossilized charcoal, indicating that they managed these food forests with fire. Low intensity burns that were highly controlled and allowed for the understory to be cleared, competing vegetation, because these trees have limited access to sunlight, nutrients, and water. And so this is just one example of how we can actually sequester carbon into the soil is actually through maintaining soil health, which perhaps counterintuitively, fire does help with that. If it's low intensity. And if you don't have these low intensity burns, you can get catastrophic fires like we see today. And we see this also in Norway and Australia, indigenous fire practices. So, but the point is that we can, as Vandava Shiva says, I love how she said, you can give an offering of nitrogen to the earth. You can get an offering of carbon to the earth. And it takes out those elements from the periodic table where it's secular and lifeless and dead and says, hey, these things are sacred and we could treat them as offerings to the earth, to the living earth. And so, for example, that is one way we can localize our food systems. And when we localize our food systems, we cut down on emissions. And when we localize our food systems, we are also regenerating the tissue of the earth, which I have a whole 7-point plan on how we can address climate change. But that's one of the key features of the plan is indigenous science and indigenous wisdom for coming back down to earth and living with it in a smart way. So I have outlined a 7-point plan called the 7 Generations New Deal, and it's sort of a response to the Green New Deal put forward by progressive Democrats at a federal level here in the United States. And the Green New Deal is all about boosting our economy while at the same time taking care of our environment. And so it's quite a groundbreaking piece of legislation, but we found that it lacked indigenous leadership and it also lacked concrete action items. So for our 7-point plan, one of the first points is removing Citizens United, the ruling that says corporations are people and therefore can contribute to political campaigns in the same way that people can. And the reason we need this removed is because without removing this, we will continue to be what we call an oil oligarchy, where oil is ruling our government. And until that is checked and put back in place, we will never have a true democracy, and anything else we do will be very challenging to actually implement. Secondly, there's indigenous science, as I mentioned just now, of how do we actually bring indigenous leaders to the fore so that they can help us, because the system that got us into this will not get us out of it. So one of the concrete action items I suggested when I was running for office was we need to create indigenous-led task forces to appropriately and respectfully compile indigenous climate science and integrate that into our communities. We also need to integrate climate science from an African-American perspective as well. So that's number 2. And that's not hard to do. People think it's pie in the sky and it's way over there, but we can create indigenous-led task force. That's really quite doable. And if we understood the sophistication of these practices, we would have done that a long time ago. Another thing we've been talking about is structurally shifted green economy. And this means not only changing how we create our energy and the green jobs that are generated through these green industries, but also changing the ownership structure of these industries. For example, why can't people of color and marginalized communities not only build these solar farms and these wind farms or what have you, but also own them too? Because we can simply recreate the systems of hierarchy that this capitalistic system already has, even if we're using green energy and things like that. So really creating a more horizontal ownership structure and putting systems in place to dismantle top-down and exploitative 1% structures. So that's another thing. And there's actually 4 more points that I really encourage you to check out. It's on my or our website. It's Seven Generations New Deal. So it's sgnd.info. And that's something we've been as a community putting together. And I think that's what makes this policy piece unique as well, is that it was community derived. It wasn't myself in a silo, but I asked Indigenous climate scientists, Western climate scientists, to come together and create this as a team. And so I think those are some of the actionable items, and there's more in there if you'd care to check it out. And as you were talking, it's funny because I was thinking about like climate science, and what's funny of, okay, I'm just thinking out loud, but I feel like it's not that scientific. Stop ruining the water systems. Stop destroying. Stop clear cutting. You know, it's so. When I imagine like an indigenous climate scientist, they're just saying like really simple stuff, and they're like, stop commodifying living beings. Stop seeing other things as objects instead of relatives. You know, so that's why I say like that's what was fascinating when you said like, who is an indigenous climate scientist? And I just thought of like, I feel like we're all climate scientists, but because we're not measuring the gaseous bubbles in ice cores and how, you know, the the global temperatures have fluctuated, have kind of like science of like, why are we destroying other communities who have taken care of this land for thousands of years? Why are we not learning from scientists who have proven trial and error experience in certain bioregions? You know, so it's sort of like interesting when you say, do you know any indigenous climate scientists? Because I think we are all climate scientists, but we're just saying the obvious. And I think that's kind of what's interesting about Western science in general. Is it reminds me of the telescope on Mauna Kea, where they said, you know, you want to see the stars, but you can't see the people. It's like they put this huge they want to put this huge telescope on Mauna Kea, which is a sacred mountain to the Hawaiian people, and it would destroy. It's like this massive construction project, like 3 football fields big, and it would destroy the integrity of the sanctity of this mountain. And so what the Hawaiian said is like, you want to see the stars, but you can't see what's right in front of you. And so it's like really similar to that, of these climate scientists like figuring out all these models and equations and thermohaline loops and da da da. But it's like, the answer is right in front of us. Take care of each other, take care of Mother Earth, stop believing in white supremacy, male supremacy, human supremacy. We are not supreme to other animals and beings, rights of nature. And it's just really just, I think, a no-brainer at a certain point. But you know, such is the hierarchy of Western knowledge over indigenous knowledge. And I think that's part of what we're trying to break down and deconstruct, is that actually indigenous peoples are not primitive. We have, sometimes the answers are so obvious, they're right in front of you. May we help to heal the women of the world, as our traditional teachings say that when the women are healed, so too will the earth be healed. In our traditions, the women are seen as the backbone, as the family. They are the ones that life comes through. So all of us came here through that sacred doorway of the cervix, and that's how we all get here. And so we acknowledge that the women are really important to keep safe and to respect and to be kind to, because they are the first teachers of the next generation. And furthermore, it's not just about the women being healthy. When the women are healthy, the men are healthy too, because one of the innate desires of the men is for them to be protected and well taken care of. And so when the women are well, the men also feel well, their esteem is higher. And this is sort of exemplified by when the US Army came to my community in 1864 and put thousands of us in a concentration camp and systematically abused the women. in front of the men on purpose. And the men were tied up, they couldn't help the women. And that they say that this camp wasn't meant to destroy our bodies, it was meant to destroy our souls. Because when the men feel as though they couldn't protect, it really is hard on the next generations as well. And you have a lot of toxic masculinity being born out of that. And so what we want to do is heal the women, not just to heal the women, but to heal the men, to heal the youth, to heal the whole world. And so it's really important to honor the sacredness of women and the sacredness of men and the sacredness of non-gender conforming relatives, so that we can all have a safe place here to live and grow and pass that on to the next generation. My name is Lyla June. I'm a Dene artist, scholar, and community servant. I'm so grateful to be here. And what I think is the one thing we can all do to address this climate crisis is find out whose Indigenous homeland we are standing on and how can we uplift their languages, their cultures, their ecological practices, and learn from them today.